I grew up learning to endure. My stepmother, Helena, had a knack for making me feel invisible, overshadowed by her daughter, Clara. When my father's business began teetering on the brink of collapse, Helena proposed a solution. I would marry Brian Thornton, a wealthy businessman with deep ties to the industry. Brian's family has influence, Helena said, her tone sharp and impatient. If you marry him, our business will stabilize. Clara has her true love, and you've always been the sensible one. I wanted to protest, to tell her this wasn't fair. But my father's face, tired, worn, defeated, silenced me. So I agreed. The wedding was an extravagant affair, orchestrated to impress Brian and his family. Clara glowed as my maid of honor, her whispers of excitement about her upcoming wedding to her boyfriend, Nathan, only amplifying my sense of dread. Brian was handsome, polished and cold. He smiled for the cameras, but the moment we were alone, the mask fell. I hope you don't think this is anything more than a business arrangement, he said that night, his tone devoid of warmth. I wanted Clara, not you. But your stepmother made her choice clear. Don't expect me to play the role of a doting husband. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodding silently. This wasn't love. This wasn't even kindness. It was a transaction, and I was the collateral. The months that followed were a slow erosion of any hope I'd clung to. Brian didn't care for me as a wife. He spoke to me like I was a subordinate, rarely acknowledged my presence in public, and dismissed my input at every opportunity. You don't need to involve yourself in these meetings, he said one evening after I suggested a new supplier to reduce costs. Just stick to hosting dinners and smiling for the cameras. But I paid attention. In the shadows of his boardrooms, I studied every detail of his business. Thornton Enterprises had weak spots, and I quietly cataloged each one. Meanwhile, Clara's life seemed perfect. She and Nathan were inseparable, her laughter filling the rooms whenever she visited. But cracks began to form. Nathan's business ventures were struggling, and Clara, ever pragmatic, began to waver. I love him, but, she confided one afternoon, twisting a gold bracelet around her wrist, Brian could have offered me so much more. Stability, luxury. Sometimes love just isn't enough. I said nothing, the bitterness pooling in my chest. It wasn't long before Clara filed for divorce. Her reasons were clear. Nathan couldn't keep up with her expectations. Around the same time, Brian's obsession with Clara became undeniable. You'll never be her, he muttered one evening after a gala where Clara had dazzled the crowd. She's everything you're not. You are not even worth being an inferior substitute of her. It was the final straw. The next morning, I walked into his office, calm and resolute. I want a divorce, I said. Brian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise breaking through his usual indifference. And what exactly do you think you'll get out of this? A third of your shares in Thornton Enterprises, I replied, my voice steady. I've been your wife in name for years, enduring the disrespect and the coldness. Consider it compensation. And I know you and the company board don't want to see ages of lawsuit on TV. Of course, I added. You can finally marry your true love, Clara. There was silence for a moment, but just for a moment. Then he laughed, sharp and incredulous. You think you can handle what it takes to own those shares? Fine. Take them. You'll regret it. I didn't regret it. Not for a moment. With my newfound shares, I approached Mr. Donovan, Brian's fiercest rival. A shrewd and calculating businessman, Mr. Donovan had been waiting for an opportunity to undermine Brian's empire. Together, we orchestrated a strategy to destabilize Thornton Enterprises. You've got a sharp eye for business, Mr. Donovan said during one of our late-night meetings. I underestimated you, Evelyn. But I see now you're more than capable. It wasn't just flattery. My understanding of Brian's operations allowed us to exploit every weakness. I proposed mergers with his smaller competitors, driving them away from Thornton. I orchestrated targeted price wars in key markets, cutting into his profits. I even used my shares to influence key decisions in his company, subtly steering it into bad investments. Brian's downfall was swift and merciless. His allies abandoned him, his finances unraveled, and finally he declared bankruptcy. But that wasn't enough. Clara had married Brian shortly after our divorce, believing she would inherit his wealth and empire. When it all fell apart, so did her marriage. "You ruined everything," Clara screamed at me one afternoon, storming into my office. Her designer bag, once a symbol of her success, now seemed out of place against her disheveled appearance. "I didn't ruin anything," I replied coldly, leaning back in my chair. "You chose Brian over Nathan. You chose greed over love. I simply helped fate along." Helena came to me next, her desperation palpable. "Evelyn, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Help Brian rebuild. For the sake of the family." I laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. "Family? You mean the same family that used me as a pawn? You let me suffer so Clara could have her perfect life. Now you want my help?" Her silence was answer enough. As I worked alongside Mr. Donovan, his son Lucas became a constant presence. A bright, ambitious man 3 years younger, Lucas was the opposite of Brian. Tall and athletic, with wavy chestnut hair that seemed perpetually tousled, he had piercing green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. His charm was effortless, his confidence unshakable. "You've got an incredible way of commanding respect," he said one evening after a strategy meeting. "I'd love to learn from you." At first, I dismissed his admiration as flattery. But over time, his persistence wore down my defenses. "You're not just brilliant," he said one evening, his voice soft. "You're inspiring. I've never met anyone like you, Evelyn. And I think I'm falling for you." I allowed myself to hope, to trust. Slowly, I let Lucas in, believing he was different. Our partnership flourished both in business and in life. Together, we launched new ventures, built on mutual respect and trust. And for the first time, I felt free, not just from Brian's shadow, but from the chains of my past. This time, love wasn't a transaction. It was a choice, and it was mine to make. But then, one evening, as Lucas and I celebrated the success of a major deal, I noticed an envelope on my desk. It was sealed with a red wax insignia, a logo I recognized from Thornton Enterprises' glory days. Inside was a single note in Brian's handwriting. "You think this is over? You've only just begun to understand what revenge looks like." I felt a chill run down my spine. Lucas noticed my expression and took my hand, his grip reassuring. "What's wrong?" he asked, his green eyes searching mine. For a moment, I considered brushing it off. But as I handed him the note, I realized something else. Brian wasn't the only one who thrived on strategy. "It's nothing I can't handle," I said, a faint smile curving my lips. "Let him try." Because I'd learned something important. Power isn't just about winning. It's about being ready for the next move,